Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of That Annuity Show. And we've got our great set of hosts here. Bruno, welcome.
Thank you.
From Canada. Ramsey from Atlanta.
Always great to be here.
Tisa, and where are you from? Where are you?
I am in Hartford, Connecticut today. Good morning.
Yeah, thanks. Broadcasting from the basement. I know.
Basement of the boat building.
Yes, basement of the boat building. I'm obviously in just outside New York. We have great guests. Okay, in fact, record set appearances by none other than Michelle Richter, co-founder of Annuity Research and Consulting, with her co-founder Mark Chamberlain. Michelle and Mark, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us.
Okay, so
Very
before we dive in,
here.
I know you have a message, I know, which we will want to get to. Before we do that, okay, you changed your name a little bit with your firm. Tell us, what are you doing? Tell just maybe a thumbnail sketch of your company,
For sure.
what we're doing for a lot of good companies.
Yeah, well, we're doing Annuity Research and Consulting. So we got really clever with the name, and we called it Annuity Research and Consulting. So, like lame insurance people would. But in all seriousness, what we're up to is an intention to bridge the communities between plan advisors and between those who are expert in the insurance space. So we very much have an intention of education, of advocacy, and of providing information for plan advisors to then be able to safely recommend solutions that include insurance solutions in plan. And I'd love to let Mark kind of tag along there to add to that thought about our corporate vision.
Sure. Well, good morning. Pleasure to be with you. And I've watched many episodes of this show, by the way, so I've enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. I got started down this path in 2000. I was talking with Paul just a bit before the show. At the time, I had just joined the iShares business before the launch. And I went down to San Diego to meet with a company called Frontier Analytics, which is a software company. Back then, it was providing the asset class optimization technology for a lot of the broker-dealer, investment advisory platforms. And at the time, index funds in general weren't well integrated into those systems. They were primarily selling active mutual funds and separate account managers. And ETFs weren't integrated at all. And so that was the challenge back then in 2000. And on the board of that company was Harry Markowitz. And so I got to meet him that day and was invited back for a second meeting. And the topic that day was, how do we integrate annuities and mortality pooling into an asset allocation optimization? And that was 2000. So here we are in 2022, and the industry still has not figured that out. And so when BlackRock bought the iShares business bought all of BGI in 2009, and a lot of us who had started the company, or started the business rather, parachuted out at that point, I was looking for a similar challenge for, how do we help the industry move forward, and what's the next place to do that? And so I got started on trying to solve the annuitization puzzle back in 2010, and Michelle recruited me this past summer. We were both presenting at a conference for the new board. It's the new Center for Board Certified Fiduciaries, which was something that was began by Don Trone, who originally founded FI360, and the class was on integrating annuities into DC plans. And Michelle and I both taught classes at that particular 3-day conference, and she recruited me to come help her try to start a company to solve the problem. So that's the longer history of how we got together.
Well, it's fascinating, this business, how many amazing people touch and drive so many different career paths. So, yeah, Markowitz, wow. How cool is that? No, so Michelle, tell us, don't be bashful. I know you are.
Okay.
And
Wallflower, complete wallflower.
yes, you are. Not, never. Said no one.
Right.
Especially no one on LinkedIn ever said that. So, all right. How should we be looking at the future of annuities? Okay, future of annuities in plan. Futures of annuity. You tell us.
Yeah. So, so from my point of view, what I'm seeing, and I with part of my time, I represent the Institutional Retirement Income Council, which is a nonprofit think tank operating in the defined contribution space. And my opinions that I express here today are necessarily my own and not per se comporting with those of either the IRIC or any of its member companies. Okay. But so in this position, I hear a lot about what's going on in the space, and I also facilitate a consortium of retirement income providers that has been established through Broadridge FI 360. So I have the opportunity to hear a lot of what's going on behind the scenes as the industry really prepares for what is expected to be a massive movement towards annuities in plan. Some of the sort of attributes that I see as necessary right now for this field to take off include annuities need to be included within what in the qualify or in the DC being defined contribution, by the way, space. We need for annuities to be incorporated into qualified default investment alternatives for them, with opt-out provisions, of course, for them to have real mainstream success. We need data format standardization to be undertaken by an industry organization like SPARC, for example. That is the industry organization for record keepers, and it is in conversation with LIMRA about how to accomplish some of those objectives, because historically, record keepers didn't talk to annuity companies, and annuity companies didn't talk to record keepers. So that sort of data connectivity that is necessary for reporting annuity benefit elements to the end participant, like that infrastructure isn't there yet. So some of that needs to be addressed for there to be a wide scale. And then lastly, fiduciary concerns need to be satisfied because plan sponsors and those who advise them serve in a fiduciary capacity. And the concerns that I'm hearing about how advisors can introduce annuities in plan are more materially about ongoing monitoring than they are about initial introduction, where there is certainly a need within the plan advisory community to get access to basic information about products, but our industry's products. But I am hearing, as I said, less concern about how to get enough information to be able to make an initial recommendation than I am about things like, how will I know what renewal rates on indexed annuities actually turn out to be, since I'm making this recommendation that needs to be monitored on an ongoing basis? So this is the kind of information that's going to be necessary within the plan advisory community for our product lines to take off. And it's looking to me like that's going to be the case. So we should all prepare accordingly. I'd like to let Mark pitch you on why we should all prepare accordingly, because, my view is that, as it stands right now, and I'll go deeper on this in a couple minutes, but, as the community stands right now, amongst plan advisors, as I mentioned, plan advisors, they advise plans. DC plans are inherently accumulation focused. It's never been the responsibility of a plan advisor to understand decumulation because historically, plan sponsors did not want to retain assets through a participant's retirement. But that dynamic has changed dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years, and it's in large part a function of record-keeping fee structures and there being economies of scale to keeping participants in plan. But it also has to do with some regulatory reasons. And it just is the case now that plan advisors need to become more expert in how to address the decumulation phase. So this whole
Michelle, I've got a
yeah.
quick question, if I may, because I think
Yes,
there's two interesting elements of what you've just said. So one is, can we talk a little bit about what does a plan advisor look like, right? So, right, there's a broad spectrum of 401k plans. There's small ones, there are big ones. So when we talk about plan advisors, are we talking about RIAs? Are we talking about sort of large consultancies like a Milliman, or what is the scope
Yes.
of people that we're talking about?
The answer is yes and yes, right?
Okay.
So the people who serve plans can be typically larger plans work with a consultant that has home office support, working for an organization that is principally focused on plan advisement, whereas retirement plan advisors. So you'd call those people consultants. Whereas you'd call an advisor a person who probably works with a smaller shop and may be on their own. And that always is performed through a registered investment advisor. But they're not per se wealth managers.
Sure. And what sort of size of plans would they be typically advising? Ballpark.
So consultants might be looking in the $1 billion range, right? Mm-hmm. And advisors are, likely addressing the market below that. I mean, that's certainly hardly a hard and fast rule, but, ballpark.
So the next piece is that I think is very interesting. Following that is it's an important business for a lot of RIAs, and what you're saying is that where before it might have been a business that was limited to sort of the accumulation phase. Now there's this retention opportunity all the way into retirement. So it's an important business opportunity as well for that audience. Is that a fair statement?
It is a fair statement, and it is a big half of the reason why I'm here today. It's because I believe that my people have a place within this community. It's the case that retirement plan advisors don't know annuities, right? Everybody certainly knows that that's the case. And ERISA does require for experts who are advising a plan, if they do not have expertise in a certain arena that they think is important for the plan, then an ERISA advisor is required to contract with an outside expert to give them guidance on how to review those, those solutions. So, from my view, I think that there is a need for insurance experts to get ready to help plan advisors to evaluate insurance contracts. That's at the heart of what Mark and I will be doing as early as February. And I feel that we will not be able to address all of the demand ourselves for such services because plan advisors do not have that expertise. My imagination is that billing models for that kind of expertise will be hourly or project-based or subscription-based. And so if that is the case, there cannot be commissions paid in an ERISA context. So it seems to me that the guidance that is going to be necessary is going to be delivered via one of the mechanisms I just described. And to me, it appears that the form of entity qualified to do such is an RIA. And that's the reason why I have used my RIA for that purpose. And I think that plan advisors will desire for the counterparty that they interact with to also be a fiduciary, an annuity fiduciary, for which I applied for a trademark because insurance fiduciary is already trademarked by one man who will prevent others from using that mark, who did, in fact, do so with me, which is the reason why my entity is renamed.
Other than owning the name, does he actually perform that function?
I decline to comment on the individual.
Okay. Well, and let me just be even a little more specific for a listener.
I hold a patent. My former employer holds a patent on intellectual property that I invented, embedding life insurance and annuities into holistic asset allocations, to challenge Mark, who said that it can't be done. It can be done. It was done. And yet I cannot call myself an insurance fiduciary.
Yeah.
I can call myself an annuity fiduciary.
Right. Well, and I'll say, from my experience providing financial planning support inside a corporate structure is immensely complicated, not only from a legal perspective, but a practical perspective of working with a wide variety of employees. So when you talk about a plan advisor or an annuity specialist, is the client the plan sponsor, or is the client the individuals in the corporation or individuals inside the plan?
It's a great question. I would argue there's three clients. There is the plan advisor who makes the determination of how to select other service providers. There is the plan itself, and there are the participants in the plan. And the person who's giving the guidance has to be thinking about all of those constituencies.
I guess is that possible? Right. I think of you think of challenges just to get the enrollment. You mentioned, I think, Michelle, you favor an opt-in into this into the process.
I favor opt-out.
Opt-out. Perfect world. What's the Ramsey gives us the thumbs up on that one. Perfect world. What is that number? Like, does everybody have 5% of their assets between 30 and 40 in this annuity? Is it, then you get to 50 and 60, you've got 10. If you were writing a lot, what would it be?
Yeah, well, I'm actually going to have Mark answer this because our organization takes a viewpoint around how the stages that we think you're supposed to look at as a plan advisor, and then it's through that lens that you're supposed to then think about product. So it's all you, Mark.
Wow, I didn't see that one coming, but I'll give it a shot. My perspective on all of this is that an open architecture approach to providing institutional quality due diligence and consulting means that there is no best solution. There are only trade-offs. And one of the possible conclusions that a board can reach is that bringing an annuity inside the plan isn't the best decision for them. That has to be one of the options on the table. And the consultant has to be ready to support that and educate in such a way that that's actually considered, in an unbiased way. So that's a little bit of a constraint on who's going to be considered the outside expert. And that's gets to the heart of, Michelle's point of the right way to compensate this kind of an expert isn't based on a product sale. The only way you're going to get truly objectivity is if they're paid a hard dollar consulting fee. So with that said, is it optimal to try and say to a plan participant, you should have X% defaulted into this solution? Well, that gets into the triage of what stage is the participant in their financial planning. Are they in the accumulation phase? Are they in the near retirement phase? Or are they going to retire next year? And so that's probably the first conversation for the expert to have with the board is, what stage do you want to solve for in your plan? Do you want to try and put something in place that will fit those who are in the most urgent need, which are those people that are retiring this year, next year, the year after? And so they've got some educational needs about how to think about putting together a retirement income plan that can not only be secure for them in an inflationary environment, but in possibly a deflationary environment also. I mean, you have to be able to do some serious education about where annuities fit relative to systematic withdrawal. And then you have to be able to do a deep dive from there on what kind of an annuity. And if we focus on only decumulation, then we need to do a deep dive on SPIAs versus riders versus, the various ways of generating lifetime income. So there is no one answer to the question of, how do we come up with a one-size-fits-all solution, because it's much too complicated for that.
And that makes perfect sense in terms of trade-off. I love the way you put it in terms of, there is no right solution. There's no one right answer. Because quite frankly, if there was, we wouldn't be talking about it right now. And my question is, have you looked at or found a way to, obviously, there's a classical measure of, assets under management, X% of your portfolio should be, allocated one way or the other. But is there a way to do that exact same reasoning and that exact same framework with income, and how much income the set of all of your assets would actually, or your portfolio would generate?
I think there are lots of ways to do that, and it's always going to be a question. And Mark, you should disagree with me if this is not your opinion, but Mark always tells me fiduciary is about process, right? So there's a million ways that you can do exactly what you're describing, Bruno. And as long as, when you're acting in a fiduciary capacity, as long as you document how you did it and why you did it, you're in good hands.
I spent the last 10 years working on a think tank project that I started in 2010, and the objective was to try and get LDI to translate to individuals. And LDI not in the way that the UK used leverage to try and come up with, meeting a funding obligation.
Mark,
LDI,
can you define LDI for the broader audience?
Liability-driven investing is what the acronym stands for, and it's something that the corporate defined benefit plans moved to following, basically the momentum really increased after the Pension Protection Act in 2006, where there was a sea change in the funding ratio calculations for DB plans. They could no longer use one discount rate to figure out whether they were funded or not. And the new rules said that for those assets that were the essential assets of the plan to be fully funded, meaning for those retirees that are already in retirement, that part of the plan had to be fully funded to be secure. So they said those assets have to use a discount rate that's basically a risk-free rate, very short-term, investment grade bond rate. Whereas for the employees that are retiring down the road, 20, 30 years out, they could use a longer duration interest rate calculation. So they came up with what we call a 3-bucket approach. They segmented the assets of the plan based on how risky the retirement funding need was. And so it's really an asset liability matching kind of a formula. So we said, why couldn't that apply to individuals? Because if you try and make the translation in terms of utility, what economists call, what's the utility of the position for that individual? The utility of their essential expenses, their food, shelter, and health insurance, is different than their utility for travel and vacation expenses, much less essential. And so a lot of thinkers in the industry have come up with, a way of saying, they've used different terms for it, but they basically said, let's think about using annuities for the most necessary part of a person's balance sheet in retirement, and get those things funded in a secure way. And we could think about using something that can have more variability for the the expenses that are more discretionary. And we think that applies almost on a one-to-one basis, just based on pure economics 101. And so the idea that corporate pension plans were forced to move down this road in 2006, but in the personal financial planning world, we're still treating individuals in most software like old defined benefit plans, and we use one discount rate, which is usually based on an expected return for risk assets to figure out whether somebody's fully funded. So our recommendation is that the planning shift to a discussion with participants about let's have you sit down and figure out with your spouse what your essential expenses are. Put those in bucket number one. Bucket number two could be the ones that follow after that in terms of need, and then bucket number three could be, your less essential or your optional expenses. And you could think about funding them differently, but for the first bucket, you should really consider an annuity.
Michelle and Mark, I want to jump in here. So really interesting topic. Just to piggyback on what you just said, Mark. So the average plan, participant, in particular, that employee that's maybe approaching retirement, this might be like mind-blowing concept, rethinking how they're going to contribute into their plan. So from an education perspective, in particular, bringing up the word annuity, noun or verb, Michelle, but bringing up the word annuity, who's responsible for that education, getting that plan participant? Is it the sponsor? Is it the provider? A combination of both? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
I think it's going to be everybody. So it's all of the above and more. It's going to take industry organizations like the IRIC has begun working on consumer-facing materials. There is a chance we may do so together with the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I think not only the categories you included are those responsible for education, but more broadly, the industry needs through dispassionate third-party kind of organizations, as well as through the individual product providers, as well as through record keepers, through the employer themselves. The employer is the person that the plan participant, or the entity that the participant feels they can trust, and rightly so. So the materials have to get to the plan sponsors, but they also have to get from there to the end participants. And that's never an easy task to accomplish, because most Americans choose not to engage with their plans. And that's pretty unfortunate, but they choose not to right up until the point of retirement. And then they experience overwhelm, or they experience shame for not having saved enough. And at that point, there's, a real challenge to help them, when it's on that last day before they retire. It's much better if a financial professional is in front of that person sooner than that.
Yeah, they kind of set it on autopilot. So my next question is, am I hearing maybe a new career path or even a talent opportunity for agents? Yes. So the plan provider, the practicality of how an annuity is sold, who has to sign the app? Like, how does this happen? So I'm thinking through, where does the role of the agent play in? Is the provider hiring agents as consultants, or are agents going to have employee opportunities within plan providers going forward? Can you speak a little bit about how you envision? I know we don't know exactly, but how this all works.
Well, I'm not sure exactly. I just know it's going to happen. So right. I think people should prepare for the fact that it's going to happen. And my hope is that other members of the insurance community make the decision to become insurance advisors, where advisors are verb sellers, right?
Verb sellers.
Can you hang that shingle now? I mean, it's a very, so the use case is very clear. In a world where, by the way, Tisa, great questions, like really getting right to the heart of the matter there. So it's a business opportunity. It's a business opportunity for RAs in the DC space. Check. All right. There's this open need for insurance expertise in that space. Check. Right. But it's not clear to me that there's a designation. Right. What is the you put up your shingle now. What does that shingle say?
Great question. It's not clear to me either. I just went and got my AIF from FI360 so that I could be an accredited investment fiduciary, even though what I focus on is not so much investments, right? It's decumulation. But so my thinking is I went and got my insurance license renewed. I got I have my RIA set up. I have a 65. And I now I have the AIF. So my thinking is I'm covered under the umbrella of those things, but I have no clarity whatsoever as to legally how this domain develops. I know only that expertise is needed around annuities delivered to plan advisors. So one of those is going to be what qualifies Mark and me to be able to do that.
Well, interesting discussion. Now, I think if I come from the institutional side to say, Ramsey, I expect this advisor to be an RA, it seems like a very logical response. However, Michelle, my experience has been, there's no such thing as a good compensation or a perfect compensation plan. It really, what I do see is that the compensation has got to match up with the results you want.
Yes.
If you think of the companies as a pyramid, you've got some very high earners with probably very large 401k balances at the very top. Economically, a fiduciary like annual contract probably makes sense. I've got high end services. Ramsey, remember ACO? I think I've lost track of this service. Great service if you happen to have an EVP title. Now, challenge is you go down the pyramid. These people may not be serviced, Michelle, if they're only earning 2% off of a $25,000 401k balance. What's the answer there?
Well, the answer is not AUM. It's not, in my view. So, or at least AUM is, to me, not my preferred billing methodology for the wealth management domain. I do think it's appropriate for the asset management domain, but that's going to get us off on a whole other track, and I still have a diatribe to deliver. So, but it does tie into what I want to talk about, which is the predominance of AUM as a billing method. It does cause a distortion in thinking that I'm going to elucidate pretty deeply.